She was not supposed to be there. She was not supposed to touch it. And she absolutely was not supposed to still be working when he walked in. But Aniya Fred was 30 days from losing everything her father built. The workshop on Crane Street. His name above the door in faded gold letters. Everything he had left behind. 30 days from being gone. And a dying piece of history was sitting right in front of her. She was a chemical restoration specialist. Buildings. Metals. Compounds. She read damage the way other people read words. And what she was looking at right now was destruction hiding under a perfect shine. Slow. Invisible. Unstoppable if left alone. She could not walk away from something dying. Not her. Not ever. Not in a city like Silver-Port Basin. A city that did not run on law. It ran on one name. Elias Lee. A name that meant your permits arrived clean. Your shipments cleared without delay. Your problems disappeared without explanation. A name people said carefully. The way you step around something dangerous in the dark. Not because you were warned. Because your body already knew. That stubbornness, that refusal to leave a dying thing alone, was her greatest gift. It was also the reason she did not hear the iron door seal shut behind her. Elias Lee does not raise his voice. He does not need to. The 3 men behind him have not blinked in 40 seconds. And Aniya Fred has not put down the cloth. He looked at the fender one last time. Then he turned. And walked out without a single word. No threat. No signal. Just a man leaving a room looking like something had shifted that he had not expected. She did not hear from him that night. The call came at 6 the next morning. And that was the moment Aniya Fred realized her 30 days had just become something else entirely. The glass fortress told her nothing from the outside. She stood in front of it at 5:58 in the morning and looked at a building that gave nothing back. Black mirror glass from the ground to the roof. No reflection. No seam. No sign that anything existed behind it. It did not look like a building. It looked like a hole in the skyline where a building should have been. 2 men flanked the entrance. They did not hold the door. They looked at her. One of them checked her case. Then her face. Then he stepped aside. She walked through without thanking him. The air in that doorway told her gratitude would land wrong. Inside the light changed completely. The glass that showed the world nothing from the outside was perfectly clear from within. Silver-Port Basin spread below her in full detail. Every street. Every rooftop. Every corner of the city open and readable while the building stayed invisible to all of it. She understood immediately why a man like Elias Lee owned a place like this. He could see everything. Nothing could see him. He stood at the far end of the room with his back to her. Watching the city the way a man watches something that belongs to him. Not with hunger. Not with pride. With the settled certainty of a man who stopped wanting things a long time ago because wanting implies there is something you might not get. He spoke without turning around. The building was called the Glass Fortress. The obsidian glass seal that kept it one way and soundproof was failing. His people had tried to fix it and made it worse. She had 30 days to restore every panel. Every joint. Every surface. Then he told her why 30 days mattered. In 30 days the fortress would host a meeting between the 3 families that ran operations in Silver-Port Basin. The CO family controlled the eastern ports. Had not spoken directly to the other 2 in over a year. The Munn family ran the city's underground money network. Trusted nobody who had not paid a price to earn it. The Beck family were the newest. The most unpredictable. In a city built on cold calculation, unpredictable was the most dangerous thing you could be. These 3 families had been one wrong word away from open war for 2 years. The fortress was the only neutral ground all 3 of them would accept. If the soundproofing failed and the wrong words reached the wrong ears inside those walls, Silver-Port Basin would not recover. He said all of it in the same quiet voice. The way a man speaks when he has never needed volume to make something true. Then he turned around. The deed to the workshop on Crane Street was in his name. Had been for 3 weeks. Before the garage. Before the call. Before any of this. She would get it back when the job was done to his satisfaction. Not before. She stood very still. She had walked in here with nothing but her skill. She had not known that 3 weeks before Elias Lee's people had pulled restoration records from a sealed archive and traced a proprietary compound to exactly one active workshop in Silver-Port Basin. Her father's workshop. Her workshop now. She had not been found. She had been hunted. And she had not known the cage was already built before she arrived. She asked one question. When do I start? Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite a smile. Close enough to matter. Tomorrow, he said. 6 a.m. She picked up her case and walked back out through the black glass into a city that looked exactly the same as it had 10 minutes ago. It was not the same. Neither was she. Somewhere in Silver-Port Basin the Beck family was already watching the fortress. They had stopped one restoration before. They were not going to let another one finish. She arrived at 6 exactly. 2 men were waiting at the entrance. Not the same ones from yesterday. These were broader. Quieter. The kind of quiet that had nothing to do with shyness. One had a scar along his jaw that had not come from any accident. The other had hands that told a story she did not need to hear out loud. These were men who had solved problems in Silver-Port Basin that did not have clean solutions. Men whose names appeared in no record Elias Lee would ever allow to be found. They had made people disappear across 3 districts without raising their voices once. Right now they were her crew. She reached into her case and handed each of them a pair of white cotton gloves. The one with the scar looked at the gloves. Then at her. She told him the oil from bare hands would break down the obsidian glass seal before it cured. That it would cost them 3 days and possibly the entire restoration. She said it the way she said everything. As plain fact. As the only version of the truth that existed. He put on the gloves. The other man already had his on. They were not skilled. But they were disciplined. They followed her instructions without question and without ego. After the first 2 hours she noticed they had stopped watching her the way men watch an unknown variable. They were watching her the way people watch something they did not expect to respect. She paid them no attention. She paid the glass her full attention. That was where it belonged. She did not notice Elias arrive. She turned for a new compound and he was already there. Standing near the back wall. Not supervising. Not checking anything. Just watching. Still and focused the way he was still and focused about everything that earned his attention. Like his attention was something he did not waste. She asked how long he had been there. He did not answer. He pulled a chair close to where she was working and sat down. His men found reasons to look at other parts of the room. She turned back to the glass. She was aware of him the way she was aware of every condition in her working space. Temperature. Light. Humidity. And now this. Him. 5 feet behind her. Watching her hands move across the surface of a building he owned. With the expression of a man who had just found something his calculations had not prepared him for. The city spread silent beyond the glass. Outside Silver-Port Basin ran the way it always ran. On fear dressed up as order. On 3 families who had agreed to keep their war cold because Elias Lee had made the alternative too expensive. That agreement had held for 2 years. It had 30 days left to survive. The silence inside had weight. Direction. Something was already being decided. Neither one of them said a word. By the 4th day the fortress had stopped being a job. It happened the way recognition always happened with her. Not all at once. Detail by detail until she could not keep calling it coincidence. The load-bearing joints in the restored sections were angled at 17 degrees off standard practice. She had seen that angle once before in her life. In her father's private notebooks. His preferred method for structures he wanted to last forever. The glass seal used a compound her father had spent 3 years developing and never shared with anyone outside the workshop. The measurement shorthand scratched into the restoration notes was a personal system he had created and taught to nobody but her. This was not a building that happened to resemble her father's work. This was her father's work. Layered into an old structure like a second skin. His hands had touched every surface she was now touching. His calculations were inside every joint she was now rebuilding. He had been here. In this building. Working these walls. Years before she was ever brought to this door. She stood in the middle of the fortress on the 4th evening after his men had gone home. She ran her palm along the original frame. Something moved through her she was not ready to follow all the way to its end. Because the end of that thought meant Elias Lee had known exactly who she was before he ever made that call. It meant the formula trace was not just about chemistry. It was about her. About Joseph Fred's daughter. And those were not the same thing as finding a specialist. She was not ready to ask why. Not yet. She told herself what she needed to hear. Her father had been well known in preservation circles. His techniques had shaped a generation of builders across Silver-Port Basin. Similarity was not authorship. She filed it under coincidence and kept working because the alternative required a conversation she was not prepared to have. That evening Elias came to check on progress. He had quietly ended 2 men's financial lives that week. Done it between a morning meeting and lunch without changing his expression once. But when she told him the building was made by someone who believed completely in what they were making. Someone who expected it to outlast them. He went completely still. The particular stillness of a man who had just been hit somewhere he had not protected. Yes, he said. One word. Carrying 20 years of weight. He left without saying anything else. She opened her father's notebook to page 43 and looked at the date in the top corner. She did not look at the formula. She already knew it by heart. She looked at the date. Across the city the Beck family was having a conversation about the glass fortress. About the woman working inside it. About what happened the last time someone got too close to its secrets. She sat on the floor holding the notebook for a long time. She had not planned to still be there at 3 in the morning. The east wall seal had shown a problem during the evening work. An inconsistency that would stay invisible right up until the moment it failed publicly. She stayed to fix it. That was the only promise she had ever known how to keep without breaking. The work always came first. The fortress was different at that hour. Quieter in a way that felt deliberate. Like the building held something back during the day and only let it out when the city went still. She was finishing the repair when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Not hurried. Not cautious. The footsteps of a man who moved through every space as though it had long ago agreed to receive him. She had learned by now that when Elias Lee came to the fortress after midnight it meant one of 2 things. Either something in Silver-Port Basin had required his particular kind of attention. Or he had chosen to be here instead. Both possibilities sat in her chest differently. She had not decided which one unsettled her more. He did not ask why she was still there. He went to the back room and returned with 2 cups of coffee and set one beside her case without a word. She looked at it. She picked it up. They stood in front of the east wall together. The city glittered below them through the glass. Silver-Port Basin at 3 in the morning. Every lighted deal still running. Every shadow and arrangement still holding. He told her the conservatory had been his mother's. The one place in her life that was entirely hers. He said it plainly. Without decoration. But she had spent enough years with old buildings to know that the plainest words were always carrying the heaviest load. Then he said something that changed the temperature of the room. The man who restored this fortress disappeared 6 months after he finished the work. No explanation. No forwarding address. Nobody in Silver-Port Basin ever asked why. He looked at the glass when he said it. Not at her. I am telling you, he said, so you understand exactly what you are holding. He finished his coffee. He left. Aniya stood alone in the quiet for a long time. Then she set down her cup and took out her father's notebook. She did not open it to the formula. She opened it to the inside front cover. Her father's name. And beneath it a date. The date he had started the notebook. She looked at that date. She looked at the building around her. She looked at that date again. The coincidence story she had been telling herself since day 4 did not survive the night. She closed the notebook. Her hands were not steady. The building held its silence around her. What the Beck family had done to the last person who knew this building's secrets they were prepared to do again. Aniya did not know that yet. But she was about to become exactly as dangerous to them as her father had been. 3 days after the coffee at 3 in the morning she opened her supply case and stopped. It was a reflex that lived below thought. Her nose read the compound the way her eyes read structural damage. Before any decision to check. Before any conscious instruction. She set the case on the work table and looked at the contents without touching anything. The color was right. The consistency was right. The label was her own handwriting from 3 days ago. But the smell was sitting 1 degree off from where it should have been. A gap so small that anyone without her exact history with that formula would have gone straight to work. Would have applied it to the obsidian glass without a second thought. Would have understood what they had done only weeks later. When the seal started breaking down from the inside. Silently. Invisibly. Exactly when the summit was underway and the 3 families were inside walls that could no longer hold their words. She did not touch it. She documented everything. Photographs. Written notes. Timestamps. Saved to a private drive she kept off-site. Her hands were steady. Panic was just information arriving too fast. She slowed it down. Organized it. Then she called Elias. 3 words. Someone got in. He arrived in 4 minutes. He stood over the open case and looked at the compound without touching it. Then he looked at her. You caught that by smell, he said. Not a question. I catch everything, she said. Something moved across his face. Not a smile. The shape of one. There for a moment then gone. He read every page of her documentation. He asked 2 questions. Both precise. Both answered. He nodded once. Continue with your reserve supply, he said. This will not happen again. She believed him. Right away. Without debate. Later when she was back at the glass she thought about that. About what it meant to believe this man so completely. This man who had transferred her deed before she knew his name. Who had built a cage around her future with paperwork and timing. Who had also handed her coffee at 3 in the morning and told her things that cost him something to say. She could not hold both versions of him cleanly. They kept pressing against each other. The Beck family, he said quietly before he left. They were the ones who got in. She kept her face still. Her hands were already reaching for the reserve compound. But something behind her eyes shifted. Something that had nothing to do with the glass in front of her. The Beck family. The newest. The most unpredictable. The most dangerous. The same family that had placed someone inside Elias Lee's inner circle. That kind of reach did not come from nowhere. It came from practice. From doing this kind of thing before. From knowing exactly how to get close to something and destroy it quietly. She filed that thought in the same place she had filed the date on page 43 of her father's notebook. She went back to work. She was on the upper scaffolding when Elias took the call below. She had not known he was in the building. His arrivals were never announced. She became aware of him only when his voice moved upward through the fortress with the same clean precision she had spent 2 weeks restoring. The building carried sound exactly as it was designed to carry it. And she understood with complete clarity that he knew she was up there. The acoustics of this building were not a surprise to him. Nothing about this building was a surprise to him. He had let her hear this deliberately. Not directly. Through the building. Through a demonstration. That was how Elias Lee gave people information he needed them to have without handing it to them himself. His voice did not change once through the whole call. 3 sentences. A name. A number. A date. That was all. The rest she found out the following morning. The breach had required inside knowledge. Someone had known her exact compound. Where she stored it. The access pattern on the security grid. That level of detail did not come from the outside. It came from someone trusted. Someone close. The Beck family had placed a person deep inside Elias's circle. Elias had identified who within hours. In Silver-Port Basin, being identified by Elias Lee was its own kind of ending. By noon the Beck family's supply operation across 3 districts had gone dark. No confrontation. No noise. Just total silence. A financial infrastructure reached at its root and switched off. Digitally. Logistically. Completely. Millions gone before the afternoon. A message written in the only language that needed no translation in this city. She asked him that afternoon how he had done it. He was reading a document when she asked. He looked up without hurrying. The same way you restore a building, he said. You find what everything depends on. And you remove it. Then he went back to the document. She stood with that sentence. He had just described them both in 8 words. The way they each moved through their work. Finding the thing beneath the thing. The foundation underneath the surface. Precise and quiet and effective in ways that only became visible after the damage was already done. She went back to the scaffolding. The Beck family had now lost their compound and taken a financial hit that cost them millions. But they still had their man inside the fortress. Losing twice had not made them careful. It had made them desperate. And desperate people in a city like Silver-Port Basin were always the most dangerous kind. 3 days before the summit that man was about to make his move. She found it on a Wednesday afternoon. Westside Foundation. Reinforcing the base joints from the ground up the way her father's notebooks had always insisted. Never top down. Always from what the structure needs most. She was working close to the floor when she felt it. A section of the base that did not sit flush the way everything around it did. Not damaged. Not warped. Deliberately fitted. To be opened by someone who knew exactly where to press. She worked it loose and found a flat sealed case underneath. The kind made for documents meant to outlast the person who sealed them. Inside were her father's restoration records for the glass fortress. Every page in his handwriting. Every margin filled with his shorthand. His signature on every single sheet. And beneath each signature a date. The year he had finished the restoration. 6 months before he died. Before her mother sat her down and told her Joseph Fred was gone. Natural causes. Quiet and fast. No reason to ask questions. She had been a child. She had believed it because no one had given her a reason not to. She had spent 20 years not asking questions. She sat on the floor of the fortress and did not move for a long time. When Elias found her, she held up the pages without speaking. He looked at every sheet. His face stayed controlled. But his jaw was tight in a way she had not seen before. When he spoke, his voice was the quietest she had heard it. I know, he said. I have always known. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked the question she had been building towards since day 4. What happened to him? Elias was quiet. The kind of quiet that was not silence but decision. Then he told her. Her father had finished the restoration. And a family in Silver-Port Basin had decided that a man who knew this building that completely was a risk they could not carry. They had arranged his death to look like a health failure. Quietly. Cleanly. No questions because no one with the power to ask them had reason to. Elias had found out years later. He had no proof at the time. He had not been positioned to move against them without starting a war that would have cost more than one life. She asked him which family. He looked at her steadily. The Beck family, he said. The room held that. The Beck family. The same ones who had tampered with her compounds. The same ones whose man was somewhere inside this building right now. Working against the summit her father had died to prevent from ever happening. She looked at her father's handwriting for a long moment. 20 years. She had spent 20 years thinking he chose to leave. 20 years building herself into the person his notebooks described without knowing she was following a trail he left for her on purpose. 20 years of grief pointed in the wrong direction because nobody in Silver-Port Basin asked questions when the answers were inconvenient. She felt that 20 years move through her all at once. It had nowhere to go. So she let it go into the only place it had ever fit. The work. She looked at the east wall she still had to finish. She picked up her case. I have work to do, she said. She was not staying for the deed anymore. She was not staying for the money. She was staying because the family that took her father away from her when she was a child was standing between her and the one thing she could do to make it mean something. She got back to work. She saw him on the third morning before the summit. One of Elias's most senior interior men. Working the north structural joint with a tool that had no reason to be in his hand at this point in the restoration. She watched from the upper scaffolding without moving. 90 seconds. Running the logic forward step by step the way she ran every structural problem. That joint carried the load for the section of the fortress where the three families would sit at the summit. A precise weakening there would not cause an immediate collapse. It would cause a failure under pressure. At the exact moment of maximum stress. In front of the CO family and the Munn family and every dangerous person in Silver-Port Basin. When it was already too late to do anything about it. The Beck family had placed him here. Close. Trusted. Patient. Waiting for this exact moment. She came down the scaffolding without a sound. She did not call Elias. She went to the building's operational panel. The one she had learned as completely as she had learned everything else in this fortress. She rerouted the environmental controls to produce a pressure shift in the north corridor. Subtle. The kind of discomfort that moves a person without them knowing they have been directed. She had propped the exterior service door open to the lift platform 40 minutes earlier during her morning checks. She waited. He moved exactly the way discomfort always moves people. Away from it. Toward the nearest exit. The lift platform was the exit. She locked the controls the moment his weight registered on the platform. Then she called Elias. He arrived to find her leaning against the interior wall with her coffee. The north joint untouched and sound. His most senior interior man suspended 50 feet above Silver-Port Basin. Nowhere to go. A great deal of time to think about the Beck family's decision to use him. Elias looked up through the glass at the figure on the lift. He looked at the joint. He looked at her. Men who moved against Elias Lee in Silver-Port Basin did not usually get a platform and time to think. They got a different kind of quiet. The permanent kind. The kind that had taken more than one person from this city without a single question ever being asked. The kind that had taken her father. Aniya had given this man a ceiling on what happened to him. A limit. That was not how things worked in Silver-Port Basin. Elias was still deciding what it meant that she had changed it. You protected it, he said finally. I protect what I restore, she said. She set down her coffee. She picked up her compound. She went back to the wall. Nobody had ever stood between Elias Lee and what was coming. Not quietly. Not without being asked. Not like this. He stood with that for a long moment. Then he went to deal with the man on the lift. The three families arrived the way powerful people arrive to things they cannot be seen attending. Staggered. Separate. Unremarkable from the outside. The Seo family first. Then the Mun. Then the Beck. Three families who had been one wrong word away from open war for 2 years. Walking into a building that Aniya Fred's father had died trying to protect. The weight of that sat in her chest like something she had been carrying since Wednesday and had not yet found a place to put down. She stayed in the service corridor the entire time. She watched the building perform. The obsidian glass seal held without a tremor. Every joint carried its load. Every panel reflected the city back at itself in clean, undisturbed silence. The soundproofing contained every word spoken inside those walls. Exactly as her father had restored it to do. Exactly as she had rebuilt his work to sustain. 2 sets of hands. 2 generations. One building that had been waiting for both of them to finish what had been started. Nobody in that room knew her name. Nobody knew about the compound caught by smell. About the man who had spent a night 50 feet above the city reconsidering his choices. About the woman who had worked through the night on an east wall seal with hands that were not steady and still got every measurement right. The building knew. Her father had known when he sealed those records under the west side floorboard. That was enough. The summit ran to its end. The Seo and Mun families reached their accord inside walls that held every word safe. The Beck family sat across from 2 families now formally aligned against them and understood in the only language Silver-Port Basin spoke, consequence, that the board had shifted permanently. No violence. No confrontation. Just the quiet arithmetic of power redistributed inside a building that should never have been allowed to stand. Her father's work had finally done what he built it to do. When the last family left and the fortress emptied, Elias found her in the main hall. Standing in front of the east wall. The one that had cost her the most. He stood beside her. Neither one of them spoke. The city spread below them luminous and indifferent. It held, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Everything I trust holds." She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. Neither one of them moved. The city carried on below them and the building stood around them, and somewhere beneath the glass her father's handwriting was still as clear as the day he wrote it. It had held. All of it. Finally. He put the deed on the table 3 days later. No speech. No ceremony. Just the document sliding across the surface toward her. The workshop on Crane Street. Her father's name first, because that was how the original deed had read and Elias had restored it exactly as it was. Her name beneath his. The gold lettering she had watched fade for 10 years while she kept the business alive on the strength of his notebooks and her own refusal to let the city take what was theirs. She looked at it for a moment. Then she signed. He countersigned. 4 minutes. The right amount of time for 2 people who had stopped wasting words somewhere around day 18 of 30. They ended up in the conservatory that evening without planning it. Which was fitting. Nothing between them had gone according to any plan either of them had arrived with 30 days ago. The fortress was fully restored. Every seal intact. Every joint sound. Every panel performing exactly as her father had restored it to perform and exactly as she had rebuilt his work to sustain. The same vision. 2 generations. 1 lifetime of notebooks passed from a father to a daughter who had spent 20 years thinking she was building a career. She was finishing a job he had left for her inside the walls of a building she had not yet been brought to. She understood that now. The obsidian glass showed them the city and showed the city nothing. Silver-Port Basin glittered below them the way it always did. Beautiful and cold and full of people who would never know that the woman standing in this building had spent 30 days holding their city's peace together with her hands and her father's chemistry and a fury that had nowhere to go except into the work until the work was done. Elias asked what she would build if she could build anything. She thought about it the way she thought about everything. Completely. Without rushing. Then she described it. A structure with the bones of a fortress and the heart of a sanctuary. Strong enough to last for generations. Open enough to let light move through it freely. Something that understood the difference between protection and isolation. Something built by someone who knew both from the inside. She could hear her father in every word of it. She did not mind that. She had stopped minding a lot of things in the last 30 days. Elias listened without interrupting. His full attention. Undivided. The same way he had watched her work from that chair on the second day. Which she had never forgotten and had never mentioned. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Draw it." Not a request. Not a command. Something that lived in the space between those two things. A space that had not existed 30 days ago. She reached into her case. She took out her pencil. His hand covered hers for just a moment. Warm. Certain. Brief. Then he stepped back. She looked at him once. She opened to a clean page. And she began.